to our next tutorial in Turing. In the last tutorial, we took a look at how to use arrays. And if you recall, we defined the arrays in the program. In other words, we filled the arrays inside our program. What we're going to do in this tutorial is take a look at how we can get the user to enter values to fill an array. So, for instance, our first program will allow a user to enter a set of 4 names and then output the elements to the screen. So we are going to set up a array called names, and it is a single dimensional array with 4 elements, so it's 1 dot dot 4, and we're filling it with names which are strings. Our for loop then is set up for a and full colon 1 dot dot 4. We want it to loop 4 times. We are going to tell the user enter a name and hit enter. And then what we're going to do is get that from the user. And what this line here does is it gets the value and stores it in names. And the first time through the loop, it's names bracket 1. It will put that name in that first box of the array, which is names 1. Second time through, a is equal to 2. It will enter the name and it will put it into names 2. Third time through is names 3, and fourth times through is names 4. Once it's completed the for loop, it just puts the elements of the array to the screen. So it puts names 1 to the screen, names 2, names 3, and names 4. So if we run the program, it's asking us to enter the names. So if we put James and Zane and Sarah and Mohammed, it filled the array and then it went in and displayed each one to the screen. So that's how we can get the user to enter information, and we can place it into an array and use it however we wish. So let's take a look at something a little more complex. In the next example, we are going to have the user enter a set of numbers, and we're going to display those numbers that are greater than the average of the numbers. We're going to need some variables here. We're going to need a variable for the total of all the numbers. We're going to calculate the average. Those are going to be real numbers. We need to set up an array to store the numbers. We're going to call it list. It's a single dimensional array of 5 elements, so 1 dot dot 5, and we're filling it with real numbers. Next, the user is going to enter the numbers, so we're going to need a for loop from 1 to 5 because there's 5 elements in the array. We're going to tell them to enter the number and hit enter. We're going to put it into the array. First time through, it would be list 1. Second time through, list 2, list 3, list 4, and list 5. Once we've filled the array, we're going to go to the next for loop. And what we're going to do in this for loop is go into the array, pull out each element, and find the total. So the first time through, list B, that is list 1, it's going to add to the total, which is 0, and come up with a new total. It's going to go through. Second time through, it will be list 2. Takes that number, adds it to the total, and gets a new total. Once it's done the for loop, it will calculate the average. It'll take the total, divide by the 5 numbers we have to get the average. Then we're going to go back into the array again and pull out each element. We're going to pull out the first one and say if it's greater than the average, we're going to put to the screen that number is bigger than the average of whatever the average is, rounded to 1 decimal place. So if we run the program, I'm going to enter the number and hit enter. So if we put 55 and 96 82, 84, then let's say 99. Hit enter. There's the 5 numbers, so our array should be filled. Now the program will calculate the total of these numbers, and then it goes back into the array, looks at each one of these, and sees which of these are greater than the average. So finishes 96 is bigger than the average of 81.2, 84 is bigger than the average of 81.2, and 99 is bigger than the average of 81.2. Now, notice in this program, we have defined the size of the array. In this case here, it has 5 elements. But what if we want the user to define the size of the array? Let's take a look at that example. This one here, we're going to allow the user to tell us how big the array is going to be. This program basically does the same thing as the last, but the difference is we're going to ask the user, how many numbers do you want to enter? Then we will go in and determine which of those numbers are bigger than the average of those numbers. So what we're going to need is a variable to store the number of elements, or in this case the number of numbers that the user is going to enter. And notice we're going to ask them, how many numbers do you want to enter? We're going to get that. We're going to call it num. We're going to create a variable called list, and it is for an array 1 dot dot to num. So we don't know what this is going to be. It could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 50, it could be 100. The user gets to define the size of the array. In the first for loop, we are going to fill the array. So it will go from 1 up to whatever number the user has entered. We are going to fill the array with those numbers. The next the next for loop is going to find the total of all those numbers. So we have to go back into the array, pull out each element, add it to the total to get a new total, and continue until the end of that array. Next line, we're going to calculate the average, but this time instead of dividing by 5 like the last example, we have to divide by num. That is defined by the user. In the last for loop, we're going to go in and pull out each element and determine which of those are bigger than the average. So if we run the program, we are going to say, how many numbers do you want to enter? Let's say 4. So we are defining the size of the array as 4 elements. Enter the number. So if we enter 56 and 91 and 72 and let's say 58. It determines the total, it determines the average, and then it goes back into the array, pulls each element out and compares it to the average of 69.3. 91 is bigger than the average of 69.3. 72 is bigger than the average of 69.3. So that's our tutorial on arrays. This one we learned how we can get to fill an array of a specific size, or we can allow the user to define the size of the array. That's it for this tutorial. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.